So we are in Madrid for the Damin conference, and I'm very pleased to meet Marc Flandreau. We are speaking about bimetallism, monometallism, gold standard, and each time we are speaking about these topics, we think Marc Flandreau, who is the best specialist in the world of this question. So, Marc, can you explain in few words how important is the question of bimetallism and gold standard in the 19th century?
So bimetallism and the gold standard is the great monetary question of the 19th century. It comes from the survival of multiple systems where some countries were using silver and some countries were using gold, and some countries had a combination of the two metals. And as a result, there was some form of, let's say, chaotic unity to the extent that because you had some countries that were using both metal, they were becoming a sort of intermediary between silver-using countries and gold-using countries. And so that was the situation as it prevailed until the beginning of the third quarter of the 19th century. With especially some countries like France, which had a very important role in that respect, because they were large, they were using large amount of gold and silver for their circulation, and they had an explicit bimetallic constitution, if you will, where the payment system gave people the right or the option to use either gold or silver in payment for any franc-denominated obligation. And this implicit exchange rate that France had set as a result of that constitution, as a result became the price at which gold and silver were trading in global market, and as a result created a form of unity into the international monetary system.
But why this system exploded after the war between Russia and France?
Well, the system had come under strain from many directions, and yet at the same time it had proved very resilient, and still today scholars are discussing the reason for the collapse of bimetallism. So some people have emphasized that this had to do with the transaction cost, and the idea that using silver, which is very bulky, for the same purchasing power in grams, was somehow inferior, and so people would have switched to gold. But actually, for international payment, the main item for shipping was insurance, and insurance is based on value, not on weight. So silver was not that bad. Other people have said that this had to do with the rise in silver production in Nevada and places like that. But when you look at the numbers, this rise in silver production was actually smaller than the rise in gold production from California or Australia. So that's not very credible explanation. And what I've argued in my work is that a very important factor was precisely, as you mentioned, the war between France and Germany. German unification decided of a change and a unification of the multiple standard that German state had. They moved to gold. They had to dispose of silver. And when they started selling silver on the market, the French were not prepared to act as a exchanger of last resort, if you will, as a trader of last resort for all that German silver. And so they suspended initially as a transient measure the bimetallic option. And this triggered a sort of panic, and people started trying to get rid of their silver, which in turn changed a number of countries' constitutions, and then there was this gradual evolution that took place away from the previous system with coexistence of gold and silver and towards gold. And so that's something I argued some years ago in my
this
book.
Very famous paper, Crime of 1873.
And recently I have written another article where I came back to that old question, which I wanted to test from yet another perspective. And I thought of looking at the information from Indian government bonds. Because as you know, India was on the silver standard, but it had also some sterling bonds. So if you compare the yield, the interest rate on the India silver bonds and the India gold bond, you can see whether there was a silver risk priced in the market. And I studied that with my colleague Kim Osterling from the University of Brussels. And what we found is that until 1873-74, when France changes its system, there was no expectation of a change in the parity between gold and silver. So actually it's reinforcing evidence that it's really this political shock of 1873-74 which triggers the transition to the gold standard.
And you have listened to the paper this morning and this afternoon. What are the fields or the direction that needs new researches in this question of bimetallism? What direction we have to?
Well, I think, I mean, in the paper that we had today, there are some very important leads. I think we always need to sort of rework the production series, not only for the late 19th century, but for earlier periods. So that's for sure, and that's something where you can see that people are very active. I also think that there are other perspectives that should be added. I think that although it's not a strictly monetary perspective, some people should start and look at the financial markets of the time, the extent to which access to the London market, which was a gold market, was an important thing. So if you wanted to borrow in the cheapest way with the most liquid market, somehow you would have to develop a link with gold. And so there are additional forces that explain this dynamic, which should be brought into the picture with future work.
Yeah, and let us make a kind of comparatism. Is there any possibility to compare the end of the Latin Union and the problem actual of the Eurozone?
Well, I mean, there's always a degree to which you can do that, and that, I mean, very clearly there were some contingencies in the Latin Union that had not been thought of, and this is what we're seeing today in the Eurozone crisis. So I think that's the general problem of any semi-federal agreement, right? Where you have some federalization of one dimension. So in the case of the Latin Union, the coinage, which is standardized at the form of supranational level, or today we have the European Central Bank, but where other dimensions of policy making, like fiscal policy, are left at the national level, you're bound to create tension. That doesn't mean that the system is bound to explode, but if you don't address those tensions when they come up, which was the problem of the Latin Union, which seems to be the problem today, then you're in trouble.
Okay, thank you very much, Marc. Thank you for coming in Madrid, and very happy to meet you in this conference.
Thank you very much. This is a very great conference.